Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of the statement and for the meetings that we've had in recent days. Mr. Speaker, the government's approach to Brexit has now become a national embarrassment. After 2 years of failure, broken promises after broken promises, the Prime Minister finally accepted the inevitable last week and voted to extend Article 50 and went to Brussels to negotiate. Last week's summit represented another negotiating failure for the Prime Minister. Her proposals were rejected and new terms were imposed on her. We now have an extension until mid-April or May the 22nd. And despite the clearly expressed will of this House, we will still face the prospect of a disastrous no-deal Brexit. This is even more remarkable given that the Minister for the Cabinet Office told this very chamber, and I quote, "Seeking such a short and critically one-off extension would be, in his words, downright reckless." Mr. Speaker, this failure has been compounded by the Prime Minister's attempts last week to pin the blame for this debacle on others. It was wholly inappropriate last Wednesday for the Prime Minister to try and pit the people against MPs. MPs elected here doing their duty to hold the government of the day to account. That is what Parliament exists for. And in a climate of heightened emotions where MPs on all sides have received threats and intimidation, I hope the Prime Minister will further reflect and think again about making what I believe to be such dangerous and irresponsible statements. Yes. Every step of the way along this process, the government has refused to reach out, refused to listen and refused to find a consensus that can represent the views of the whole country, not just the Conservative Party. Large parts of our country continue to be ignored by this government. No wonder so many people felt compelled to march on the streets or sign petitions over the weekend. Even the most ardent of Leavers, Mr. Speaker, the most ardent of Leavers think this government has failed. It's easy to understand the frustration at this chaos. It exists in this House, in Brussels and across the country. The government has no plan. For them, it's all about putting the Conservative Party before the country. Given that the Prime Minister admitted she does not have the numbers for her deal, will she accept today that her deal is dead and that the House should not have its time wasted giving the same answer for a third time? But the Prime Minister has succeeded in unifying two sides against her deal. The CBI and the TUC's unprecedented joint statement last week demanded a Plan B which protects jobs, workers, industry and communities. Has the Prime Minister got a Plan B? No. The government has failed and let the people down, whether they voted leave or whether they voted remain. The country cannot continue to afford a Tory crisis. It's time, Mr. Speaker, for Parliament to take control. And that's why, later today, we will be backing the amendment in the name of the Right Honourable Member for West Dorset. You made it clear last week, Mr. Speaker, that for the Prime Minister to bring a deal back, there must be significant changes. There are none. Rather than trying to engineer a way to bring back the same twice-rejected deal, will the Prime Minister instead allow, rather than fight plans for indicative votes? She cannot both accept her deal does not have the numbers and stand in the way of finding an alternative that may have the numbers. It is ridiculous to suggest that Parliament taking control is overturning democratic institutions. It's not, Mr. Speaker. It's Parliament doing its democratic job of holding government to account. So, Mr. Speaker, will she agree to abide by the outcome of these indicative votes if they take place on Wednesday? On behalf of the Labour Party, We will continue with cross-party discussions to find a way forward, and I thank those members who have met with colleagues of mine and myself to have these discussions. I believe there is support in this House for a deal based on an alternative that protects jobs, the economy through a customs union and full single market access, and allows us to continue the benefit from participation in vital agencies and security measures. If the government refuses to accept this, we will support measures for a public vote to stop a no-deal or chaotic Tory deal. The government has had over 2 years to find a solution and has failed. It's time, Mr. Speaker, we put an end to this and move on from the chaos and failure and begin to clean up the mess. It's time for Parliament to work together and agree on a plan B. If she's brave, the Prime Minister would help facilitate for this. If not, Parliament must send a clear message in the coming days. Mr. Speaker, I hope where the government has failed, this House can and will succeed.